Welcome to Time Travelling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every story of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Trisha. This week we're taking a trip back in time to Scotland in 1746 in The Highlanders. We'll be discussing the Doctor, the companions, the villains, and giving our thoughts and score out of 5 for the story as a whole.
We'd also love to hear your thoughts on this story, so in order to join in the discussion, you can check us out at Time Team on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. That's TIMETEAMP. Or you can email us at timetravelingteam@teamproductions.com. Now though, on to the story recap. Episode 1. As the sounds of battle filled the air around them, a small band of Highlanders composed of 2 young men, a young woman and a wounded older man are making their way across a moor. They are spotted by an English redcoat who fires at them. He misses but is killed by one of the young men. The group then continue on their way across the moor. A short while later, the TARDIS lands in the nearby woods and Ben and Polly exit, taking in their new surroundings. Ben is excited as the geography of the area coupled with the cold weather makes him believe that they have arrived back in England. Polly is skeptical and asks the Doctor to confirm the time and place, but before he can answer, he and the others are forced to take cover from an incoming cannonball. After examining the cannonball, the Doctor decides that they should leave, but Ben wants to explore the area and takes off for a nearby hill. Polly says that they need to follow after him, and an exasperated Doctor does so. In a house, the wounded man is being seen to by the woman, who is his daughter, but she says that he is badly in need of a doctor. He deliriously asks about the outcome of the battle, and he is told by the older of the young men that the Highland clans have been routed after being decimated by the English cannons. He then asks about the fate of the prince, and is told by the younger man that he fled the battle early. This causes a dispute between the 2 men before the wounded older man orders them to stop. He then asks why they didn't leave him to die along with the other wounded members of their clan, as his title of Laird of Clan MacLaren now means nothing after the Battle of Culloden Moor. The older man says that they will all be dead soon as the English are killing wounded and prisoners alike. They suddenly hear a sound from outside, and both he and the younger man draw their weapons and go outside to investigate. They see that it is the Doctor, Ben and Polly, who are investigating a nearby cannon that has been spiked and abandoned. The Doctor sees a Highland cap on the ground and tries it on. Polly notices that there is writing on the cloth headband, making a loyal declaration about the bravery of Prince Charles. The Doctor flings it down in disgust, and the 2 Highlanders appear and take them prisoner back to the cottage. Once there, the Doctor realises that they are the Jacobite followers of Bonnie Prince Charlie, a claimant to the British throne. The Highlanders intend to kill them as they suspect they are enemies due to their English accents. Polly asks for the Doctor to do something, and this causes the young woman, whose name is Kirsty, to beg for them to be spared so that they can save her father's life. Ben uses the commotion to take the Laird's pistol from him and hold him hostage. The Doctor tells Polly to disarm the men, and then he goes to check on the Laird. He tells Polly and Kirsty to go fetch clean water, but to be careful of English patrols. After they go, he tells the 2 men that if they promise not to hurt him, he will tell Ben to take the gun off them. Once they agree, Ben reluctantly throws the pistol onto the table, causing it to go off, leading to a reprimand from the Doctor and the Highlanders, as the sound has attracted a squad of British redcoats. The redcoats encircle the cottage, and the older Highlander tries to make a break for it to draw them off, but he is shot dead. The soldiers enter the hut and tell Ben, who is initially relieved to hear their accents, to keep his rebel mouth shut. He insists that he is not a rebel, and so they instead label him a deserter. The Doctor, in an effort to stop any fatal action by the soldiers, affects a Hanoverian accent and introduces himself as Dr. Von Weir. He says he is waiting for transport to return him to England. The sergeant advises his lieutenant that they should hang the rebels without further ado, but Ben says that they should be treated as prisoners of war, a sentiment that is ignored. All 4 men are then removed from the cottage. At the English camp, a well-dressed man is observing the end of the battle and commenting to his clerk Perkins that the slaughter of the rebel wounded is such a waste of manpower. The man's name is Grey, and he is the Crown's Commissioner of Prisons, a title he intends to use to profit from the sale of rebel prisoners to plantations in the overseas colonies. They make their way to the battlefield in an attempt to spare some of the rebels for sale. Polly and Kirsty return to the cottage, but observe their friends being taken out to be hanged. Polly, like Ben, is confused as to what is going on, but insists that they need to do something to save them. She throws a stone towards the cottage to attract the attention of the soldiers. It is successful, and a few of them are led by their lieutenant to go after them, having been given instructions to capture any woman due to a rumour that the prince could be pretending to be one. Despite it being illegal, though, the sergeant orders the hanging to proceed without the lieutenant there. Just before the stools supporting them are kicked away, Grey arrives and orders them to be placed into his custody. The sergeant is initially reluctant to let them go, but after Grey bribes him, he orders them to be taken down. Grey seems interested only in Ben and the young Highlander and tells the sergeant he can execute the Doctor and the Laird. However, the Doctor quotes a parliamentary law that prevents citizens of foreign countries from being executed without contact with their homeland. He also states that the Laird is under his care, and so Grey takes them all away with him towards Inverness. Polly and Kirsty have managed to make it to a nearby cave that Kirsty's clan uses as a raid shelter. Kirsty reveals that the prisoners will most likely be taken to Inverness, and Polly says that they need to go after them, but they will need funds. She spots Kirsty's ring, but she refuses to sell it as it is a family heirloom, and pulls a knife on Polly when she tries to take it from her. Polly storms off, ignoring Kirsty's warnings that she will get lost in the cave in the darkness. This warning proves to be true as she falls into an animal pit. As she is trying to pull herself out of it, a figure suddenly appears, brandishing a knife. Episode 2. The figure reveals himself to be Kirsty, who helps Polly up, explaining that she thought it may have been a redcoat that fell into the trap. Unfortunately, Kirsty slips at the edge of the pit and falls in, leaving both girls trapped. Polly climbs up on top of Kirsty in an attempt to get out of the pit, but hurriedly climbs back down when she hears the redcoats enter the cave. The lieutenant berates his men for having lost the girls and orders them to return to the cottage for his horse. Polly tells Kirsty to make animal sounds to lure the lieutenant to the edge of the pit, leading him to fall in and be taken prisoner by the girls, who begin to search for him for anything of value. He is incredulous at his treatment, but Kirsty points out it is better than how her kinsmen are being treated in Inverness. They manage to take 20 guineas from him and his credentials, identifying him as Lieutenant Algernon Finch. Polly also takes a lock of his hair, saying that she plans to use it, along with his identity card, to get in good with his commander if the need arises. They then leave him in the pit and make their way to Inverness. At Inverness, the prisoners are packed into a cell that is partially flooded, which Ben views as barbaric, but is told by the young Highlander, who is the Laird's ceremonial piper, that there are worse prisons. The doctor takes a look at the Laird's wounds, and the piper insists that he practice bloodletting in order to help the Laird. Ben says that would kill him, but the doctor hushes him and uses the Highlanders' astrological superstitions against them, and says that the bloodletting must wait for the correct time. The doctor begins to wash the Laird's wounds and comes across a silk flag underneath his clothes. The doctor removes it and puts it under his own jacket, waving down the piper's protest, saying that the Laird would be hanged for sure if it was found on him. The doctor then rouses the prisoners by playing a rebel tune on his recorder. The guards come in to break up the singing, and the doctor, reverting back to his German persona, says that he is a loyal servant to the crown and that he has overheard a plot to assassinate the general of the English forces. Ben tries to reassure the piper and the rest of the prisoners that it is all part of a plan to get them out of there. He then says that they should instead focus on their own problems, as the water level is slowly rising and the tide line is well above their heads. At a nearby inn, Gray is discussing the loading of prisoners onto a transport ship belonging to his underling, Captain Trask. The sergeant then arrives, informing them that the doctor wishes to speak to them. He instructs Trask and Perkins to retrieve the prisoners and tells the sergeant to bring in the doctor. Gray dismisses the sergeant and then pulls a gun on the doctor before ordering him to reveal the details of the plot. The doctor tells him that there is no plot, but instead offers to share the bounty on Prince Charles's head with him, showing off the standard that he has taken from the Laird. As Gray is distracted by his thoughts on the matter, the doctor throws the cloth over him and disarms him. He then binds and gags Gray and puts him into a nearby cupboard when he hears knocking at the door. He admits the visitor, who turns out to be Perkins, and informs him that Gray has taken ill and gone to bed. He then tricks the gullible Perkins into believing he is sick, aided by a few gentle slams of Perkins' head onto a table, and instructs him to wear a blindfold for at least half an hour. Perkins inquires about the knocking coming from the cupboard, but again the doctor tricks him into thinking that it is part of his illness and reminds him of his instructions before leaving. Shortly after, Trask comes back and releases Perkins and Gray, who tells Perkins to summon the guard and instructs Trask to carry on the loading of the prisoners. Finch's men return with the sergeant, who attempts to extort money from Finch before taking him out of the pit. Finch is incredulous at this, but nevertheless agrees before remembering that Polly and Kirsty took all his money. He then promises to make good with the sergeant at Inverness. The doctor meanwhile has disguised himself as a scullery maid and is making his way down the corridors when he comes across Trask leading a group of young prisoners away, including Ben and the piper and the Laird. However, as he tries to keep his head down to avoid being recognised by Trask, Ben fails to recognise him even after he accidentally bumps into him. The doctor observes the door that they are being taken out of and then returns to the kitchen where he found his disguise, and then returns a short while later with food which he uses to distract the guards away from the door. Once the coast is clear, he makes his way through the door after the prisoners. The prisoners arrive at Trask's ship, the Annabelle, and Trask brings their attention to a corpse that is being dumped over the side, telling them that it is the only way they'll ever escape his ship. Episode 3. Ben and the others are forced into the hold of the ship, which is overcrowded and foul-smelling. The Laird seems to be getting his strength back and thanks Ben and the piper for helping him. Ben asks around to see if anyone knows where they are being sent, but one of the prisoners accuses Ben of being a spy when he hears his accent. Ben is nearly lynched, but the Laird intervenes, recognising the accuser as William Mackay, an ally to the cause of Prince Charles. The Laird then introduces the piper as Jamie McCrimmon, one of a long line of pipers to his clan, and they both speak well of Ben, ensuring Mackay that he is a friend. Mackay apologises and informs them that he is the actual captain of the Annabelle, but he was betrayed by Trask, who was his first mate, under the pretense of being a loyal servant to the crown. Ben refutes this by highlighting the treatment of the prisoners and comes to the realization that they are all about to be sold into slavery. Outside Inverness, Polly is waiting for Kirsty to return from gathering supplies. Kirsty returns with clothes and a sack full of oranges that Polly requested. Polly says that they will pretend to be orange sellers to get into the prison so that they can locate the others, and if they are caught, they can use Finch's credentials to help them out. They then make their way into Inverness. At an inn in the city, the Doctor is mingling with the crowd when Finch enters, demanding a drink on account. Polly and Kirsty arrive, but the Doctor is unable to grab their attention as they are accosted by the sergeant, who accuses them of being the women he was searching for earlier. Polly notices Finch, and together with Kirsty, they make him vouch for them, as well as getting the sergeant to empty the inn of soldiers. Once they are alone, they inform him that they know the prisoners have been moved, but they don't know where to, and so he tells them to look for Grey. Once he has gone, the Doctor goes to speak to them, but is stopped by the arrival of Perkins, who is instructed by Finch to speak with the women. When they ask about Grey, he tells them that he has gone to speak with the prisoners. Grey arrives on the Annabelle and informs the prisoners that the Crown has given them 3 options. They can either give evidence against the rebellion, or be hanged for refusing to do so. The third option is to sign a 7-year contract to work in the plantation colonies. Mackay warns the prisoners that the plantation work is little more than an extended death sentence. Grey then uses his silver tongue to convince them that an honourable debt is still a debt, whereas the plantation work offers a chance for life. After some hesitation, all the prisoners, with the exception of Mackay, the Laird, Jamie and Ben, line up to sign the contracts. Ben then walks up in front of the line in offering to sign, but asks to be allowed to read it first. He then rips up the contracts and is knocked unconscious by Trask for his trouble. Grey orders him to be put in irons and placed somewhere else. He says he will return with new contracts, but if anyone follows Ben's example, they will be executed on the spot. He then says to Trask that Ben will be punished when he returns. At the inn, Perkin insists that the women stay with him when they make an attempt to leave. He suggests that they play a game of whist, but the Doctor overhears this and joins the game as it requires 4 players. Perkin tries to protest but stops when the Doctor pulls a pistol on him. Grey then arrives and orders Perkins to get a new set of contracts. Polly tries to get his attention, but the Doctor waves her down. Once Grey is gone, the Doctor tells Perkins that he is going to leave with the girls, but Perkins is to not move for another 10 minutes or he may develop another illness, indicating to the gun. The trio then leave and make their way to the barn where they hid earlier. Once there, the Doctor disposes of the gun, showing the girls that it was empty the entire time, due to his dislike of weapons. He then goes to lie down, much to the surprise of the girls, but he informs them that there is nothing that they can do at the moment as their friends are on board the Annabelle. Polly insists that they must do something and suggests that they capture the ship and let the Highlanders use it so they can escape to their French allies. Kirsty initially refuses, but the Doctor says that she and her father will certainly die if they stay in Scotland. The Doctor then suggests that they use the money they took from Finch to buy captured weapons from the English soldiers so that they can sneak them on board the Annabelle to give to the prisoners to free themselves with. He then falls asleep, much to Polly's frustration, and so she and Kirsty go to find a rowboat. Later that evening, Grey and Perkins arrive back at the ship with fresh contracts. He tells Trask to ensure that all prisoners sign them, but he is to use gentle coercion, otherwise it could lead to a riot. He then tells them to proceed with Ben's punishment, which will be a ducking session into the water below. Back at the barn, Polly and Kirsty return with a boat and a meagre assortment of dull and broken weapons. The Doctor soon arrives with a small arsenal that he indicates he stole from the local armoury. As Kirsty is examining the weapons, the Doctor notices her ring and says that it is not a family heirloom at all, but the personal ring of Prince Charles, which he gave to her father as a thank you for saving his life during the battle. The Doctor says that he can use it to save their friends, and she gives it to him. Back at the ship, Ben is brought up on board and his arms and legs are bound. He is then hoisted into the air with another rope and dropped into the water. Episode 4. After several minutes, Trask orders the rope to be hauled up, but they see Ben is no longer attached to it. They scan the murky waters, but cannot see any sign of him. However, Ben surfaces on the other side of the ship, and once he is satisfied that the coast is clear, swims to the shoreline. When he arrives, though, he finds a musket pointed at him by a redcoat. Fortunately for the exhausted Ben, it is actually the Doctor in disguise, who takes him back to the barn after showing him their gifts for the prisoners. Once there, Ben explains how he managed to escape to Kirsty and Polly, whilst the Doctor goes to fetch his own clothes. When he comes back, they go over the plan, which entails the girls waiting while the Doctor and Ben sneak the weapons on board the Annabelle to the prisoners. However, Polly objects to this, and both she and Kirsty insist on coming along. The Doctor then says that they will come with him to arm the prisoners, whilst he gives Ben another job. On the Annabelle, Grey and Trask are debating whether or not to sail in the morning due to the heavy fog present. Trask tries to establish dominance over the group by saying that he and his ship are the determining factor of their success, but Grey says that without him they wouldn't have the prisoners in the first place. He also subtly threatens Grey that if he tries to reveal their agreement to the Crown officials, then his word would not be a match for Grey's, a statement which makes Trask back down. Trask then goes back up on board to oversee the final arrangements for their departure. Grey and Perkins are finalising their own business when Trask returns a short while later with two sailors carrying the Doctor between them. The Doctor says that he has a deal for them, and after Grey tells the sailors to leave, the Doctor shows them the Prince's ring. He says that he received it from the Prince personally, and when pressed for his whereabouts, tells the trio that he is in the hold of the ship disguised as a Highlander, but only after demanding 10,000 guineas for the information. In the hold of the ship, the Laird, Jamie and Mackay are discussing their fate. The Laird wishes that he could see Kirsty again before he dies, and his wish is soon granted when Kirsty appears at a gunport after she and Polly rode alongside the Annabelle. She starts to hand him weapons and explains the plan to him. Once the deal is agreed upon, the Doctor tells him that Jamie is actually the Prince, and the trio then leave to investigate, but the Doctor reminds him that he is the only one who can identify him correctly. They enter the hold to find all the prisoners asleep and begin to search for Jamie. The Doctor points him out to them, and once they get closer, the Laird lets out a battle cry, and all the prisoners rise up to fight. They surround Grey and Trask, whilst Jamie leads a group onto the main deck to dispatch the sailors. In the hold, Trask and Mackay duel, but Trask manages to wound Mackay and escape up to the upper deck, where he's confronted by Ben, who was lying in wait to block off the sailors' retreat. However, he is no match for Trask, and he is nearly killed, but is saved by Jamie at the last moment, who swings into Trask, knocking him to the ground. Jamie then forces him back to the railing of the ship before pushing him overboard. Mackay comes up on deck and calls a halt to the fighting. He tells the prisoners and the remaining sailors that he intends to sail for France, and they can come with him if they are willing to work for him. They do so and begin to set sail. The Doctor and the Laird bring Grey up from the hold, and together with Ben and Jamie go into a rowboat for a joyful reunion. Perkins begs to stay with the Scots, having grown tired of Grey's ill treatment of him, and the Laird agrees to it. He and Kirsty then rejoin their countrymen, and the travellers wish their new friends good luck. Back on the shore, the travellers watch as the ship leaves, with Polly upset that they never got to say goodbye to Jamie. Ben says that he disappeared when they were leaving, and suddenly Jamie appears nearby. He says that he stayed behind as he overheard their plans to try and make their way back to the TARDIS, and offers to help them navigate the area and avoid the English patrols. Ben tells them to duck for cover from a nearby patrol, but Grey calls out, attracting the soldiers' attention. Together, the Doctor, Ben and Jamie dispatch the soldiers, but Grey escapes. Realising without Grey as a hostage, their journey to the TARDIS will be more difficult, but the Doctor reminds Polly that they have another friend that they can go to. Outside the inn, the travellers encounter Finch and enlist him to help them. He is reluctant to go until his commanding officer comes outside looking for him. The Doctor then shows him the Prince's ring, and he orders Finch to aid them in apprehending Prince Charles. They go back to their cottage where their adventure started, and on the way, Polly tells Finch everything that has happened to them and about Grey's side business as well. Polly returns his credentials to him, and moments later Grey arrives with a squad of soldiers, ordering Finch to arrest them all. However, Finch instead arrests him for slave trading, as he has no legal backing since the contracts that the prisoners were signed were stolen from him by the Doctor. Finch leaves with a thank you kiss from Polly, and the travellers say their goodbyes to Jamie, but Polly, fearing for his safety, asks if he can come with them. The Doctor agrees, but on the sole condition that Jamie teach him to play the bagpipes. Once they get back to the TARDIS, Polly, gently but firmly, pulls an apprehensive Jamie into the TARDIS, which takes off once they are all on board. End of the story. Now that's the story recap out of the way with, we're going to go, as always, going to go over to the trivia section to Trisha for some interesting tidbits.
Cool, thank you, Paddington. So the air date for the Highlanders was the 17th of December 1966 to the 7th of January 1967. The credited writers for this story are Elwyn Jones and Jerry Davis. Interestingly, although commissioned to write the story, Elwyn Jones didn't actually do any work on the story at all. He was too busy with other projects. So this is his only Doctor Who credit, and he didn't actually do anything.
This kind of reminds me of, was it the Massacre that was written by the husband and wife couple, but she didn't add anything to it, but she's credited on it.
Yeah, so the other credited writer for this is Jerry Davis, who was the script/story editor at the time, and he's the one who actually wrote all 4 scripts. Now, usually the script editor, cleans up the scripts, things like that. We've discussed that before, like Dennis Spooner did some stuff last week and things like that. But in this case, I imagine because Elwyn actually did nothing, they sort of realised, well, we have to credit Jerry Davis because he's the one who actually wrote it. But since he was the script editor, he shouldn't really have been writing scripts completely or whatever.
Yeah.
He should have been writing them with somebody else. So they just decided to include both. We did previously discuss Jerry Davis when we were talking about The 10th Planet. He co-wrote that story with Kit Pedler. And this is actually, of his 4 Doctor Who stories, this is the only one to not feature the Cybermen. Obviously, working on 10th Planet, he was part of the duo that created the Cybermen in the first place. And we will have 2 more of his Doctor Who stories still to come.
So is he kind of like the Terry Nation of Cybermen?
I think it's a combination of him and Kit Pedler, because Kit Pedler, we discussed before, like, he was sort of the scientific advisor and, you know, clearly was very interested in that side of things.
I love Kit Pedler's name as well, because I just imagine a guy selling football jerseys at the side of the road.
You went with football jerseys, I went with cars, like in Knight Rider.
Own this genuine memorabilia of Knight Rider.
Anyway, moving on. The director for the story was Hugh David. This is the first of 2 Doctor Who directing credits for Hugh. We'll see his work again-ish in Fury from the Deep. I say ish for missing reasons. He was also considered to direct The Underwater Menace, but he rejected the offer because he felt the story was too expensive for the show's budget and he wouldn't be able to do it properly.
Well, next week we'll actually find that out.
Now, Hugh was actually an actor in the early to mid 1960s, and he was actually considered for the role of the first Doctor, but Verity thought that he was too young because he was only 38 at the time.
And that's actually a scene in the Adventure in Space and Time, which we covered. That, and the guy that was going through, so it was Mervyn Penfield, and his first name was Rex. I can't remember what his last name was.
Harrison, I believe.
Is it? Because Rex Harrison is My Fair Lady.
No, in that case it wasn't Rex Harrison. Who the hell was it?
So while we find the last name, it turns out that the reason that particular person kept suggesting Hugh David is because Hugh David was a really good friend of his. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know,
Yeah, it's like
it's quite common in, particularly in TV at that time. To be honest, even in TV now. This was actually mentioned somewhere. Let me find it. Rex Tucker.
Rex Tucker.
I was confusing 2 different names that are actually completely different people altogether. Anyway.
Cool.
Another interesting fact about Hugh David is actually he was married to Wendy Williams, and that might be a name that sounds familiar to you, Paddy, because she went on to be Vyra in the Tom Baker story The Ark in Space. Which is actually one of my favourite stories. I really like that one.
We will get to that eventually.
Eventually, yeah. Hugh passed away in 1987. So this is the final pure historical story that we're going to see for a long time. The next quote-unquote pure historical, in that there are no science fiction elements, will be Black Orchid, and that's not until the 5th Doctor. Even then, though, a lot of people don't consider that story, Black Orchid, to be a pure historical, because it's not actually based in historical fact. It's just set in the past. But it's not set, you know, this is based around actual events.
Alright. Well, like, you know, you could argue like that some of the previous historicals like don't come, like, I mean, like the Aztecs, like, I don't imagine like that there was ever specific people called Tlatoxel and Outlook and...
No, but it's based around historical facts as such,
yes.
if you get my drift.
Yeah. I get.
You know, similarly, even the Time Meddler, while that's not a pure historical, it does have historical fact built into it. So this is actually the last one that we're going to be discussing from a pure historical perspective for a while. Put it that way.
When you keep saying historical fact, all I could think of, lads, it's only the Bible, it's not gospel.
Oh, Dara. Anyway, as I've mentioned when talking about Hugh David, all 4 episodes of this story are currently missing from the BBC. There has been, to this point in time, when we're recording, no animated version of the story released by the BBC. So we are once again back to our old friends at Loose Cannon, who reconstructed the story using the surviving audio, stills, a couple of filmed inserts they did themselves, and that type of thing. The working title for the story was actually Culloden. Culloden? Culloden, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The Battle of Culloden was the final confrontation of the Jacobite Rising in 1745, and this is like 1745, 1746. Though a number of historical characters are mentioned, so Bonnie Prince Charlie and so on, Grey is actually the only real world historical person to appear in the story. So Grey actually existed, and he actually did send prisoners as slaves. Except apparently one of the stories that I saw was that one of the contracts were lost, so he wrote all the names himself and just sent them off. Prick.
Yeah.
The Highlanders, in terms of missing stories, actually has a bit of a reputation. And this is why I find it funny that it hasn't been animated yet. It was the first story to be wiped. On the 9th of March in 1967. Bear in mind, the final episode aired on the 7th of January 1967. So it was 2 months later they decided to wipe it.
So, question. Given, no, because I haven't really thought about it, but would episode 3 of this be the very first Doctor Who New Year's Day special?
Let's see, if we're doing 7... Yeah. That would have been a New Year's story. Thankfully they didn't do what they did with that episode that happened to take place at Christmas.
Yes.
That's annoying. So on to our cast. So as Kirsty, we have Hannah Gordon. This is Hannah's only televised Doctor Who acting credit. I specify televised because she did voice Skagra's ship for the webcast version of Shada, which is interesting. Her other acting credits include David Copperfield, Great Expectations, Jack and Nori, Upstairs Downstairs, Watership Down, The Elephant Man, Taggart, and Heartbeat. Grey was played by David Garth. This is the first of 2 Doctor Who appearances for David. We'll see him again in Terror of the Autons. His other acting credits include Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, General Hospital, Dixon of Dock Green, Special Branch, The Further Adventures of the Musketeers, Emergency Ward 10, and The Avengers.
Yay, bingo cards all around.
David passed away back in 1988. Trask is played by Dallas Cavell. This is actually the 3rd of 5 Doctor Who appearances for Dallas. We previously saw him in Reign of Terror, where he was the roadworks overseer. And he was then in the Daleks' Master Plan as Borse, one of the criminals that was stranded on Desperos, who tried to get onto the ship and the Doctor shocked them.
Yeah.
We will see Dallas again in The Ambassadors of Death, and again after that in Castrovala. His non-Doctor Who acting credits include Crossroads, Z-Cars, Dixon of Dock Green, and The Avengers. Big bingo card score there for Dallas. Dallas passed away back in 1993. As Finch, we have Michael Elwyn. This is the only Doctor Who acting credit from Michael. His other acting credits include Coronation Street, the 2007 TV series of Robin Hood, Doomwatch, Softly Softly, The Avengers, and The Newcomers. Lastly, we have our new companion in the form of Jamie McCrimmon, who's played by Fraser Hines. Fraser was born in 1944 and actually had his acting debut at the age of 8. Before getting the role as Jamie, Fraser appeared in Charlie Chaplin's The King in New York, The Young Jacobites, The Silver Sword, Emergency Ward 10, and Coronation Street.
I just have this image of an 8-year-old Fraser Hines still in a kilt, just like acting in all these parts.
Jamie wasn't originally meant to be a companion. There was the option, the contract he signed had an optional 3 stories in case they wanted him to stay on a bit longer. But originally, he actually filmed Jamie watching everyone leave in the TARDIS and he stayed behind. After they filmed it though, Innes Lloyd asked him if he'd like to become a full-time companion, And so they had to redo that final scene in order for it to make sense that Jamie went with them.
Mm.
After Doctor Who, Fraser's probably best known for his portrayal of Joe Sudgeon in Emmerdale Farm, which later just got renamed to Emmerdale. I didn't realise this, that they're actually the same show.
They actually make a joke of it in an episode of Bottom where it's like, oh, Emmerdale Farm is just called Emmerdale now. I think it's because they need to get more Emmerdale onto television.
He played this role from 1972 to 1994. Fraser has named this, The Highlanders, as his favourite story because it's the one that led him to being in Doctor Who.
And like he's still like incredibly active in Who to this day, I think.
Oh yeah, like he does a lot of stuff with Big Finish. He's been very invested in specials and things like that. And when we get to his sort of final companion story, we'll talk a bit more about what he's done with Who from that point on. But spoiler warning, it's going to be a while before we get to talk about that.
Yes, absolutely.
For a guy who was never meant to really be a companion, or maybe would be a companion for 3 stories, we're going to be talking about Jamie McCrimmon for fucking ages.
Yes. But we won't say when, we're just going to say it's a long time.
Indeed.
So, as always, we are now going to go on to the character discussion side of things. So we have the Doctor, the companions, alongside their story-based companions, and the villains of the piece. So, as always, we'll start off with the man himself, the Doctor. So, Trish, would you like to lead us into this?
Sure. I wasn't quite sure what to make of the Doctor in this story. Particularly coming off last week's story. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just a sort of, it's very hard to get a firm handle on him in this story compared to what we had last week. One thing that is very obvious, though, he's very quick on his feet. Come up with a cover story in 2 seconds. The German accent, though, was, it was fierce dodgy. I mean, there's doing a racist accent. And then there was this. It was so bad.
It's stereotypical British actor pretending to be German type stuff.
Yeah. Oh, it's so bad. But as in, the accent was bad. The accent was cringeworthy. The idea behind the accent and pretending to be a German doctor, that stuff was brilliant, but just the accent itself I found very challenging.
As well, like being very tongue-in-cheek, like Dr. Von Wehr is like Doctor Who in German.
Yeah. But like, and that's not the only disguise he has. Like, it's interesting that we only have 4 episodes for this story, but he disguises himself as the German doctor several times. That crops up several times. He has his, I don't know, is this his first of many forays into cross-dressing? And then he also dresses up as the red shirt.
Soldier. Yeah.
At the end of it.
Also, I would say like that the German doctor is more of a persona than a disguise, because he still looks like him. Whereas
true,
the other two,
but he's not
like
being himself.
Yeah, but whereas the other two, he's actually literally, he's put on like the apron and the penny, and he's got the head shawl, and then he has a fake mustache, I think, when he's pretending to be a soldier.
Yeah. The thing that I love about this, though, is that it really highlights how different he is from Doc Bill. Like, we saw Doc Bill dress up, and we saw Doc Bill play a part when he needed to. Reign of Terror being an example, right? Where he dressed up and pretended to be someone else.
Yeah.
Similarly, if we're talking about the Romans, we're talking about historical stories here, he's used to playing the part. With Doc Pat, though, it's different because he gives it 110%.
Yeah.
And he's jumping from one character to another character to another character. Very rarely is he being himself. Whereas when Doc Bill did it, it was like, he said, oh, I'm this other person, but he was fundamentally just acting like himself.
Yeah.
He never acted like, someone in power or things like that. He just said he was.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing that I just noticed for this doctor was it was weird to see him so free in terms of threatening people.
Yeah, like
Like he has
he's.
Ben draw a gun on the laird
Mhm.
and doesn't comment about it at all. He himself draws a pistol on someone. It doesn't matter that it wasn't loaded. It was weird to see him draw one. And then repeatedly smacking Perkins' head off a
Oh,
table.
but I'm sorry, but that was hilarious. It was like, you're not feeling well, are you? Bonk. You're starting to feel the effects now. Bonk.
Do you have a headache? Bonk. I was like, what the hell are you doing? But again, it's great that, like, this is our second story with him. Last week we said we had regeneration or rejuvenation or whatever we want to call it, changes happening. So his character was a little bit all over the map anyway.
Regeneration, rejuvenation, recasting, whatever.
Yeah. This week though, it sort of cements the fact that okay, this is now at least his second story or like second adventure. With Ben and Polly, he is different.
Yeah. Oh,
and
absolutely.
that's very obvious.
Absolutely. Like, my initial notes are the name's the Doctor. He's like, this is the most secret agent based story I think the Doctor has ever done. Whereas, like, yes, he puts on the fake accent to howls of laughter on our side of things. The multiple disguises, leaping into action when it's necessary. And I hate the fact that this story is missing. For the simple fact of, in the previous story, which is now animated, so we get some semblance of it, that we get to see Patrick Troughton as, like, we saw the various different sides of his Doctor, like, like how scared, like how he actually is scared when he's scared, as opposed to, as we said, William Hartnell, who is like he has that stiff upper lip type thing that I won't be intimidated by you, whereas like his is like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And here we get to see the other side of his thing, which is that Patrick Troughton is a fantastic comedic actor. And the fact that we have all these scenes where he's with Perkins, or when he's dressed up as a scullery maid or whatever it is, they're all missing. It's such a shame. Like, it is such a shame. No, thankfully this isn't like a thing that dies away with his Doctor. This is always there, but you'd like to see it for the first time. You'd like to see the first instances of it.
Yeah, and like when I was talking about the trivia, I said that it surprises me that there's no animated version of this. It was the first one deleted.
Yeah. It
should have been the first one restored, surely.
But like, see, this is the thing now, is that I suppose the first one restored was the Invasion. Yes, it was the Invasion, which I suppose in his tenure is an incredibly popular story, whereas the Highlanders, maybe not so much. And I think as well that because there were so many existing episodes left of the Invasion, that they decided to try it out. I think, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, but I can't remember the first fully missing serial that was it Power? Was it Power?
Was it Power?
What?
Was it Power?
I think Power is the first completely missing serial to have animation on it. But which, again, like as we discussed last week, is a fantastic story. So, but just like when I was doing, because as you know, like I watch an episode a day to prepare my notes. We are 14 episodes in to Patrick Troughton's run before we get to see him act live, as opposed to just like, and it's so weird when you say that out loud. Like, he's an iconic character, he's an iconic Doctor, and his first 13 episodes are missing. Spoilers for next week. But I think that the second of three pieces has now fallen into Patrick Troughton's like performance as the Doctor perfectly. And I think now with the addition of a new companion, because we've had him, his first story, We've had his first story with his existing companions and a new person come on board. And now next week we're going to have his first story with existing companions, new companion who becomes an existing companion, and we're going to see how it is there. So, as part of his trilogy of opening performances, he's great in this one again.
Yeah, I'd agree. So, speaking of companions, we have our companions for this story. So we have Ben and Polly continuing on from last week. And then we're going to have our new companion of Jamie. And then we have our story-based companion of Kirsty. So if we start off with Ben and Polly, what did you think of Ben this time around?
A good Navy man knows how that he must be a strong swimmer. And he really does show it here, like, because he does the like swimming from one side, holding his breath underwater, then swimming from one side and swimming to the shore, and it's great. So Ben and Polly, because I'm going to address it now with Ben, is there for me watching it, right? And I don't know whether it was just because as we mentioned before, like, that we're Irish, and watching a story where you have English characters not fully realize what's going on when they're in their period of their own history. I thought it was kind of surprising, especially with Ben being in the Navy. He would have probably had a knowledge of like the Jacobite Rebellion or even like the Scottish Wars. So being surprised that the Scots aren't happy with the English coming.
Yeah, like I wrote this down that like you have a sailor who's clueless about military history.
No, not everyone that goes into the military will be a buff of the military history. It's just a thing, like, the military or the Navy or whatever. It's a good job, like it's a steady employment. If you're looking for steady employment, you don't need to fully understand like the lore of the battalion or whatever it is that you're involved in. But I just found it a small bit strange.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to get with Ben though is that they had an opportunity here to have a Barbara moment where you've Ben saying like, oh yeah, I may just be a sailor, I'm not an officer, but I know my military history, thank you very much. And I'm surprised they didn't take advantage of that fact, and instead they have himself and Polly not only come across as clueless but kind of callous, like particularly Polly, because Polly, we have said, is a great read of people. She reads people really well, and she reads the situation really well, which she does later in the story perfectly, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the fact that they are so, yay, the English are here to save us, thank God the English are here. I was like, are you blind as well as stupid? Like,
but like we when I messaged you there the other night about this, and it's a case of, it's no matter what country that kind of presents something, it's a case of like history is written by the victors, and like obviously the Scots lost the Battle of Culloden Moor, like the Jacobite rebellion failed, and so again it's a case of certain things aren't taught, or they're taught from a very skewed perspective. So I can account for it with that regard, that side of things. But when you're actually kind of in there, like they eventually realize what's going on, and like that things aren't as initially portrayed in their own time. I think it just took a small bit too long for them to realize that, for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think particularly when Polly went off with Kirsty, that should have been the end of it. But she's still saying like, but they're English, why do you care? It's like, oh, Polly, it doesn't matter why she cares at this point. It just matters that she does care. Like, forget the history part. They clearly make her uncomfortable, and she clearly said they're going to kill her. So just leave it alone. Like,
but on the flip side of it, when they do see what's going on, they, like, Ben effectively says, like, you can't treat them like this. They're prisoners of war. It's morally reprehensible what you're doing here. And
which again is him being like, I may just be a sailor.
Yeah.
But this is a time of war. These are prisoners of war. Again, I'm like, but bring the history part into it there. It'd be great.
And like it's great. Like, he really stands up for them, like, as well. Like when he's in the prison, and the doctor has just said, like, I'm going to sell these prisoners out. It's a lot of balls on Ben's behalf to try and placate that crowd of men.
Yeah.
Because he's trapped in there with them, and they could rightfully tear him to shreds. But thankfully the Laird, kind of realizes what's going on, and he's okay with it. And another thing I like about Ben in this is that his Scully-esque tendencies are completely gone by virtue of the fact that he just seems to be fully on board with wherever the TARDIS lands next.
So there was 2 things I found in this with Ben. Right, A, it's nice to see his training as a sailor come in terms of him swimming. I also didn't realise that sailors were trained in the arts of Harry Houdini, but whatever. There was 2 things. The first one was something I liked, which is towards the end when you've Ben and the Doctor and Polly and Kirsty going over the plan. And Polly's like, so what, we're just meant to wait here for you? And Ben kind of makes the point of, it would be safer if they stayed there,
Mm-hmm.
And Polly puts up a fuss and says, no, we're not going to sit around here waiting for you. And the Doctor says, okay, you can be in the boat. As opposed to Ben arguing the point, stressing out over their safety or whatever, he just says, okay, well, what am I going to do now? So, like, there's no argument. We've said before that, like, Ben is all about keeping Polly safe, but he also recognizes how strong she is in her own right. Yeah. And in this case, it was a case of, I would rather you stay here to stay safe. I'm not staying here. Okay. No, that was the end. There was no big argument.
Yeah.
It sort of reminded me a little bit of the novelization of the Daleks.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the novelization, Barbara kind of has to fight to be able to go with them. And then she kind of feels a bit stupid later because she's not really contributing and stuff. And this is sort of like the inverse of that, where Polly doesn't have to fight to do what she wants to do. Yeah. Ben just respects her and says, yeah, no problem.
There's no stopping the Duchess.
Yeah. The other thing, and this is what I wanted to ask you a question about, was one of the things that you and I both loved about 10th Planet was the effect killing the Cybermen had on Ben.
Yes.
And how beautifully that was done in that story. Did you find, though, that at the start of this story, he was a bit careless with weapons?
So, this is something that I initially kind of thought about and was kind of going, Jesus Christ, man, like, you don't throw a fucking gun down on the thing. But I would put it down to, like, yes, it is a firearm, but he probably isn't as familiar with the firearms of that era. Like, even the different types of pistols. Like, so normally, a lot of the very famous ones from that time would be flintlock pistol, which is like the cap that goes down and hits the spark and off it goes. But there's matchlock pistols, which you have to use keep an open flame to spark the powder. So I would just put it down to his unfamiliarity with that firearm. Then again, like, all firearms, he should be treated with the same reverence. Yeah,
well, that's kind of my point. Like,
yeah, but I would say that, given the fact that it's like an early flintlock pistol, he could have like literally shot it at them, and they still would have been safe. But again, with regards to kind of like that side of things, I had this impression like even though he had the gun on the Laird, he was like, please don't make me use this. Please don't make me use this.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where because we don't have the footage,
yeah,
like that would have been all facial expressions, and that's missing. Do you know? Yeah. Actually, a lot of this story, in fairness, would be reactionary. Do you know? Reaction, giving a nod, giving a wink, catching an eye, and we're missing all of that interplay. Nothing against the loose cannon guys, obviously they did a great job, as they always do, but without seeing that conflict in Ben that we both kind of assumed that he would have, just based on his character, again, also with the sort of clueless / callous nature in the way that he was talking to these people in the first place. And actually, doubling back, the doctor as well. Like when Polly reads out what was written on that hat,
Yeah.
he throws it down on the ground. And again, because we're missing the footage, like, was that meant to be a, like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, oh, the Jacobite skin, like, what was that meant to be?
Because like, yeah, like that's very it's very
antagonistic for no reason.
It's also very partisan of the Doctor to kind of
Yeah.
pick one side over the other, like, and like, unless, like, you know, he's actually like, okay, yes, he picks one side over the other when he is actually involved in whatever circumstances there, but just to be an observer, that it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I said that whole bit at the beginning did kind of have me going, what are our heroes doing?
Oh god, you're gonna be Marco Polo.
Oh,
So how about I never said he was a hero, I just didn't say he was a villain. So Polly next.
yeah, so like the Polly's equally clueless about history. Although, I mean, you made the point. You know, A, history is written by the victors. Also, you know, we're perhaps coming from a different perspective than a lot of people watching the show when it first aired. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have certainly met a number of people from Britain primarily, so not from Northern Ireland, but like from Wales, Scotland and England, who don't really know a whole lot about Irish-English relations. You know, like a lot of our interpersonal history is like a paragraph in a history book that they don't really go into much detail about.
Like,
so,
it's actually, it's not even just our relationship with Great Britain. It's like, I was at a con in England, and there was an American person in our group, and one of the Irish guys that was with us turned to this American person and said, "Do you know what? I have a question for you. Why are Native Americans so mad at you all the time?" It was a legitimate question, and so this is the sort of thing, is that if you kind of put yourself into Polly's side of things, Polly's whole, when you first meet her, she's an administrative assistant, so her whole thing would have probably been like office temp work, like her education would have been in that style. And not everyone that travels with the Doctor was going to know exactly what's going on in their history, things like that. So it's forgivable, all right, but I actually realised that if you think about it, the two anthems of the two countries involved, God Save the King / Queen and Flower of Scotland, have verses detailing kicking the shit out of each other. So like,
yeah, I think it's a case of like, it's understandable for the character.
Yeah.
I just don't think it was acceptable for the story that both modern human companions were completely fucking clueless. And the Doctor didn't try to fill in the blanks. Do you know? But specifically about Polly, I think for me personally, going out on a little bit of a limb,
yes,
this might be to date Polly's strongest story.
I am in complete agreement with you, because this is her first solo escapade, and yes, it gets off to a rocky start, but Jesus, does she come up good in it?
Yeah, like
really,
immediately, you know, yeah, she goes off to get water. She's still a bit weird with Kirsty, blah blah blah. But then it's like, we need to create a distraction. We're going to get them to chase us. Very focused, constantly like, what's the next plan? What's the next plan? I fell down a hole. Shit. Cool. I have a way to get out. There's redcoats there. I have another plan. It was constant plan after plan after plan. And you kind of get the sense that like when herself and Kirsty were trying to get weapons and stuff, and they came back with like 3 weapons, because who's going to sell a gun to a woman in 1740s or whatever?
Yeah.
And then the Doctor comes in with like literally like a wheelbarrow full of stuff, and you kind of get the sense that she's like, oh well, fuck you.
Well,
I tried, you bastard.
To be fair, he stole them. she tried to purchase them.
Excuse me.
No worries. But like her level of cunning and intelligence in this, it's just like you get a hint of it in the Smugglers when she does the whole like, you know, we're in service to a great and powerful warlock and I'm casting a spell. You get hints of that. So that's with the intelligence. You also get hints of her cunning in 10th Planet with the whole I'm going to make coffee because that's all I as a simple girl can do. Wink wink, nudge nudge, that type of stuff. Then, as we said in Power of the Daleks, she takes a step back because this is the Doctor's story.
Yeah.
Because, so whereas here, now she's off on her own, as I said, she comes up good. Like
she really, really does.
She really does.
And like what I love about her is that she always comes up with a plan.
Yeah.
Whether it's using what very little she knows of history, because it does come up later. She's like, you do sell oranges, right? She's clearly trying to remember stories or books that she's read or something like from her childhood growing up or whatever. Or whether she's using her knowledge of being able to read people and her feminine wiles. Like,
the
whole thing with,
Algernon Finch, aka Algie.
Algie, like the whole thing with him.
I could just.
It's just brilliant. Like
I just had this picture. Do you want, Madam? After being encountered with you, I now seek the company of men. Just like I'm staying away from you. Oh, like every time he sees her, it's just a case of no, not you. But
in fairness, she did pay up with a little peck on the cheek.
Yes, she did.
You know. The main thing I have about Polly with this, like, and my biggest takeaway is that it is so refreshing after the last few months to see a female companion who can take care of herself and drive the plot.
Yes.
We've been missing that kind of since Barbara left, to be honest. Vicky didn't really do a lot of plot driving a lot of the time.
No.
When she was with Stephen. So it's definitely after Dodo. I mean, Dodo and Polly are like fucking night and day.
Yeah. And like the thing with I have a note here to say like that I'm looking forward to seeing how Polly will start to Barbara Jamie, you know, to be like Mother Barbara. But the one like there's the obvious difference between Barbara and Polly is that Polly is she does scream. And she has a very kind of fearful reactionary scream. But once things have calmed down, once, you know, she feels safe again, that's when she starts to contribute, that's when she starts to plan and stuff like that. Whereas with Barbara, it was literally a case of, fuck, what do I do? This.
Yeah. In fairness though, like, I mean, going story by story, I wouldn't think that Polly screams any more than Barbara does. I think the difference between Polly and Barbara and why it's a bit more obvious with Polly is because Polly is very girly and very open, whereas Barbara was quite reserved. Now, still amazeballs, but more reserved. That teacher persona was a large part of who she was, whereas Polly's a very free, sort of fun-loving whatever. So
I think with Polly it's a case of like the first episode cliffhanger, like it's so weak because she looks up and she sees someone standing over them with a knife and it's just like and then it's like, oh, it's Kirsty who you saw earlier on brandishing a knife at you.
In fairness, it's dark, she can't fucking see for shit.
I know, but like I just like I was going to compare it to the Romans one where it literally falls off, you know, the TARDIS lands on a cliff and falls off, but that's just perfection. No other cliffhanger will ever be as good as that as far as I'm concerned.
What it actually reminds me of, now that we're talking about it, is the android invasion. Yes. There's a bit where Sarah falls off a cliff.
Oh yeah.
She's just lying on a slope. It's so brilliant. It's like, but yeah, it reminds me a bit of that now that we talk about it.
But we can agree that this is a very strong performance by Polly.
Oh, definitely. I knew nothing about Polly before we started this watch through. I hadn't seen a single story with her in it. I'd seen pictures of her. I am being blown away by this character. Starting with the War Machines, I am being blown away every week by its character, and I'm really looking forward to seeing her going forward.
And again, another kind of indication of don't judge the classic period until... No, if you watch it and she's not for you, because we've said before, like, that's, fucking grand. But this is a case of don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, or don't judge a companion by... Do you know that comic strip that was done of all the female companions screaming doctor, and then you've got Rose throwing her tantrum at the end, being like, I thought I was the only one. Do not judge the classic companions by that comic strip.
And as I always say whenever that comic strip comes up, justice for Barbara, because she's not on it.
Yeah. But don't judge them by that comic strip, because that's not who these characters were.
No. So, will we do Kirsty first, and then Jamie, or...
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Okay, so Kirsty, I don't have a whole lot to say for her, other than she's like a proper Highland lass. And like, I wonder, like, if the Laird had died, would she have joined the crew? Because effectively speaking, without the Laird, like, I know it's going to sound very kind of patriarchal or whatever, but without the Laird, the clan dies, because if she marries, she no longer inherits the Clan McLaren name. She takes on the name of her husband and so on, which is a shame. And I think that, like, if Jamie hadn't been the one to go with her, or go with the TARDIS crew, would she have been a good fit? I think she could have been.
I think she could have been. So the thing with Kirsty is, I also don't have a whole lot to say about her in the grand scheme of things. She's a bit of a naysayer, like, constantly. And you've Polly constantly trying to drag her up by her shoelaces. Just fucking come on. But it's completely understandable as well. Do you know? And she does get stuck in. She just, she can't see her way out of the situation that she's in. Again, Polly may not know this period of history specifically, but she knows history broadly.
Yeah.
She knows that if Kirsty just stays out of the way or whatever, that she'll be fine. The thing about Kirsty, though, is I'm a bit mixed on her character, because I would have loved to have seen her do more. So she was the native companion in that duo. It's a duo of Polly and Kirsty. She was the native companion who knew the lay of the land, who knew how everything operated and stuff. And she didn't really come up with any ideas herself. She was just following Polly. At the same time, though, Kirsty was a one-off character, and it gave us the time for Polly to shine, which I loved. So it's kind of this catch-22 where I kind of wish she'd done a little bit more. But at the same time, her only doing as much as she did meant that Polly got to shine, and Polly's the character that we're going to have going forward. So it's kind of like a catch-22 for me.
One thing I will say, though, is that I did love that moment where she stood up to Polly over the ring.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it in other things where the more knowledgeable visitor from the future will take advantage of the uncultured savage and whatever, where it's literally a case of she pulls out a knife and goes, back off, bitch, or I'll cut you.
Yeah, and again, like, you could maybe argue she should have been a bit more honest with Polly about the ring. Also, maybe don't go around actually fucking wearing it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she doesn't know this woman very well, and this woman seemed delighted that the English turned up. So...
Yeah, that's it. It's like, was it, no, I am not a spy. Ooh, what lovely jewellery you have.
Yeah, but don't actually wear this really important, apparently very easily recognised ring just out and about.
Well, that being said, Algie didn't recognise it. Perkins didn't recognise it.
Did they get a close look at her hand?
Well, Perkins was about to play cards with her, and of course, like, you'll be seeing people's fingers.
Well, yeah, but like, as soon as the doctor showed it to Gray, he knew immediately what it was.
Yeah.
The point is that it was dangerous to wear it.
Yeah.
Put it in your pocket.
Yeah.
So a secret pocket into your skirt and just pop it in there.
But yeah, like so, like I know, like it is a kind of a catch-22 because like you want to see more development, but at the same time, the lack of development led to a really standout moment for Polly, who is the ongoing companion for the show.
Yeah, I think had they tried to bring Kirsty on board, I think Kirsty would have been. I actually think she would have been a really good fit, to be honest. I think had Kirsty continued on, it would have bothered me a lot more.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's just a sort of like, oh, she could have been cooler than she was.
Does she fall into the camp of like Sir William Depreau, like who could have been just like awesome?
Yeah, I think so. Except she's actually better than Depreau because Depreau disappeared after 2 episodes, and Kirsty at least stayed till the end.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Depreau's out there somewhere
doing something.
Yeah, I like to believe that he's that knight at the end of the Last Crusade. That's my headcanon, and I'm sticking fucking to it. So, how about we move on to Jamie?
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about Jamie in this first story.
Yeah,
to be perfectly honest, it was a 4-parter. We were getting some great development from Polly, some very good comedic moments from the Doctor and stuff. So Jamie wasn't really given a hero moment. Like, he wasn't like out leading the charge or whatever. He's the piper. He's not the guy leading, whatever.
Wait, he does have 2 hero moments. One where he leads the prisoners up onto deck to fight the sailors, and also when I really wish again we could see it, where he like swings like Robin Hood style into Trask to save Ben.
But what I mean is that he's not the one.
No, he's not the one rallying.
Coming up with an idea, rallying the troops, right? Like, he's not doing that, which is fine, because what he does do is protect and defend.
Yes. My first note here is that Jamie McCrimmon is loyalty personified, because he absolutely refuses to leave the Laird's side for a single moment throughout the entire thing.
Yeah.
And like, obviously, look, clan culture, it's very, like your lord is your bond, your laird is your bond, and he obviously has a very important role as like the ceremonial piper for the family, but like he is like, he's a brave, and he stands up for his friends, and he's a good fighter. I think he'll be a fun addition to the crew, because I can't wait to see his Action Man team ups with Ben, and the inevitable My Fair Lady interactions that he has with Polly and the Doctor.
So this is an interesting thing, right? I loved his interactions with Ben.
Yeah.
Because they are literally speaking 2 completely fucking different languages.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of imagining, like, Ben using, like, Cockney rhyming slang, and Jamie just using general Scottishness.
Yeah, just Gaelic.
Or Gaelic terminology, but also just his own general form of expression, and the 2 of them just missing points completely.
Yeah.
Like, conversation breakdown completely. No idea what's going on between the 2 of them.
Why does he keep calling me China? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it would be brilliant. I'm really looking forward to seeing them together. The thing that I find interesting, though, again, and this is why rewatching this with you is such an interesting thing, and why you're watching all of this stuff in order rather than the original way I watched it, which is higgledy-piggledy and all the best. I've said that my knowledge of the Second Doctor is very limited to the War Games, which is his last story.
Yeah.
So my knowledge of him as the hero of the story was incredibly limited. And I had always kind of thought, and largely because of the Jamie McCrimmon effect, which will come into play in the weeks to come, that you keep mentioning to me in general life, I was sort of led to believe that the Second Doctor needed Ben and needed Jamie to be the Action Man, in the same way that Doc Bill needed Ian and needed Stephen. I think had it been Kirsty instead of Jamie, who'd gone with them. How about? I don't feel like there's a gap that Jamie is filling.
Mm.
Do you know? Whereas when Ian and Barbara left, there was a very obvious gap that needed to be filled, and Stephen was the one who, while I ended up not liking him as a character, he was a good fit for that missing hole, like that role that needed to be filled. Stephen did fit in it. I am surprised by how much the Doctor is doing for himself.
But like, see, this is the thing now, right? Is that, and even if you want to go back to Doc Bill, for at least all of the classic Doctors, there is this running theme that yes, an action man character benefits the crew because they're young, they're virile, they're strong, whatever the case is. However, the Doctor is more than capable of taking care of himself without them. A la the Rescue, the Romans, the Daleks Master Plan, the Time Meddler, because he kicks people in the dick. And like obviously you've got John Pertwee, who's we known as the Aikido Doctor, but like everyone up until at least Christopher Eccleston, they're physically capable of taking care of themselves. But the whole essence of the Doctor is that he shouldn't have to do that because his whole thing is solve everything via as peaceful a means as possible. Yeah.
So I get all that.
Yeah.
I just wasn't expecting it to be as...
Yeah.
Okay, now I can imagine the three of them, Ben, Doc, Pat and Jamie, going off together to do something that Ian would have had to do by himself. If we're to go with that comparison.
I see it. But see, like again, he's just full of surprises.
Indeed.
And so I think that's everything that I have for Jamie, other than the fact that I think he will be a very good addition to the crew.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how their interactions are going to go. I've been loving Ben and Polly so far, so to introduce another character into that dynamic, I'm going to be really, really curious to see how that's going to play out.
So, onto the villains.
Yes.
So, we have 3 villains to discuss. We have Finch, Trask, and Grey, because God love him, poor old Perkins is just a simpleton.
Yeah. If we start with Finch...
Right. Now,
I don't necessarily consider Finch to be a villain.
You see, now this is the thing, right? Is that I was thinking back about it, and while Finch isn't like he's one of those things where he's an antagonist via circumstance because he's a British officer, and obviously our heroes are tied in with the Jacobites, so he is in effect going to be an adversary to them. But like at the very end, he comes good not because of like he has some sort of I'm going to side with the Jacobites now, I'm going to become a turncoat. It's no, profiting off slaves is against the law of the crown. Yeah. I'm going to bust you on this.
Yeah, the reason why I wouldn't necessarily class him as a villain of this story is like it's a villain purely by circumstance, which is he is an English officer. That's it. But he's also kind of your typical purchased commission officer.
He's a toff. He's an absolute toff. I mean, like for fuck's sake, his name is spelled with 2 F's.
And his name is Algernon. He himself. So other than the fact that, like, obviously, he would have had to authorize the hanging, even though the sergeant went off and went to do it without him, whatever. Other than the capture at the beginning and getting caught up in Polly's diversion, he does nothing against our characters for the rest of the story. Yeah.
And I get that, but like...
Partially because of it just didn't come up. Yeah. Partially because he doesn't want anything to fuck with Polly, because he just wants her to leave him alone.
That blonde girl beat me up and took my lunch money. Which is literally what happened. Like.
So, like, he's a villain... He's a villain to Kirsty.
Yeah.
He's not a villain to Polly. He's a pawn to Polly.
Like, this is an interesting thing now that we've kind of come across as of late in, we'll say what, like the last 10 stories worth of stuff, where we have characters that we've classified as allies or villains, but usually fall into the other camp via circumstance. Like, if you go back as far as the massacre, you have not Nicholas, but I'm just going to call him Emma Thompson's dad, because but like, he's a complete and utter fucking prick.
Yeah.
But he's kind of on the side of the angels in the story because he's friends with Nicholas and he's friends with Admiral de Coligny. Whereas, like, last week we talked about Hensel, and I was like, Hensel, he's just an incompetent fucking bureaucrat who gets Quinn to do everything for him and he reaps all the rewards. But he's not antagonistic to our heroes, but yet he's an antagonist of the story.
Yeah.
So, like, sometimes, and these characters, like, they are kind of important to the story. Like, so, like, where can you categorize them other than just put in circumstantial?
Algernon was there.
Yes. If you need a man to be there, Algernon Finch is your man. Don't ask him to do
Particularly if Polly steals his money and his ID and a lock of his hair. What was with taking a lock of his hair? What the fuck was that meant to prove?
As in, like, a bit of, like, I know Algernon Finch very well.
Maybe. I don't know about you, but I never used to cut the hair of people that I knew very well.
Yeah.
That's creepy as fuck, Polly.
She's a collector.
That's fucking Hannibal Lecter shit, like.
Yeah. I'm just reminded of, like, someone asked me before to describe a potential employee, and I felt kind of bad about it, but I said, if you need someone to sit in a chair, he is your man. If you need him to do something while in that chair, anyone else will do. So, yeah, I think that's a case of Algernon Finch in this one.
Although, in fairness, kudos to him at the end, though.
Oh, well, like, yeah.
Like, when he's like, no, she told me everything.
Yeah.
He believes her.
Mm-hmm.
Don't really know why. Other than the fact that she gave back the ID like she said she would and whatever. But, like, he's taking no shit, which I really liked, in fairness to him.
Although, I will say, like, I can imagine him just kind of going to Grey. Look, sir, I'm perfectly willing to hang these men legally. However, selling them for profit, for shame on you.
Hey, one's illegal and the other one isn't.
Cool. So now how about we actually move on to, like, people that we can agree are villains?
Yeah.
Perkins. It was a surprise all along. No. Trask and Grey. So who do you want to go with first?
Why don't we go up what I deem to be the totem pole is Trask and then Grey at the top.
Cool.
I don't know if you disagree.
Well, like...
Or are they sort of level pegging for you?
I think they're level pegging because of what they each represent in terms of threat level. Too. So, do I just, like, flip a coin? Heads at Trask's, tails, it's not Grey.
Heads is it's Trask, tails is not Grey. So
Exactly.
what Paddy's saying is let's go with Trask. Okay, Paddy, what were your thoughts on Trask?
Alright. Just because, like, he's there in front of me right now and I'm just going to fucking say it. So, he reminded me of very much like Pike from The Smugglers. In the
Not
sense,
from Star Trek, different Pike.
No, yeah, exactly. In the sense of, I never feel comfortable when he's on screen. Even when I know that the heroes have a surefire, like, success, I don't feel comfortable when he's there. No, I feel the same way about Grey, but entirely differently. Like, so even at the end, like, I was waiting for him, like, to do, like, some serious damage to, like, like, either, like, finish off the Laird or finish off Mackay or really hurt Ben. And I also don't like the fact that there's no confirmation that he's dead. All you're told is that he falls off the side of the ship.
Yeah, I don't think he is dead.
Yeah, so if Ben survived, then he surely fucking survived. So I'd be curious to know if there's an expanded media, be it either an audio drama or a book or whatever, that deals with, Highlanders 2, Trask's Revenge. Which would be a better Highlander 2 than the fucking actual movie Highlander 2.
So, I have, like, 3 notes about Trask.
Alright.
Right. First note. Asshole.
Succinct, I like it.
It's what he is. He's a royal fucking asshole and a mutineer. So, fuck you, Trask. If I heard the word swab one more fucking time. The man has a very limited vocabulary.
Yeah.
And swab came up a lot.
Maybe he's a former surgeon. Swab.
It either that or he he uses the word swab the way I use the word fuck, which is for everything. We can change the rules of Paul's time traveling team drinking game to be every time Trask said swab in this story, you have to drink.
Yeah.
You'll be fucked by the end of the second episode.
It's one or the other. Don't use both at the same time. Because we don't have a waiver for you to sign.
The last thing is, out of all the characters in this story, and this is just my personal opinion, I think Trask is probably the most one-dimensional.
Oh yeah, of course.
Out of all of them.
But that being said, his dimension is incredibly terrifying.
Yeah, it's one horrible dimension. But it's one dimension. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, particularly when it comes to... Particularly I think when it comes to historical stories, we have to have some characters that we can just say, this character is this.
Yeah.
So this character is evil, or this character is good, or this character is dumb, or this character... Some characters you just need to have, here is your stamp, and Trask's stamp is asshole.
For 4-part stories, one-dimensional villains are not a bad thing. Because as we've seen before, they can be incredibly good, you know? Longer stories, yes, I would say they require more than one dimension. But here, he suits his purpose perfectly.
Yes.
Which is to annoy the fuck out of Trisha whenever he says swab.
Yeah, it just got so annoying.
Cool.
I think it's just they also used the same, face shot every time he said it. And so it literally felt like I was in... Ironic, given the day that we're recording, it felt like Groundhog Day. It's just the same fucking scene over and over again.
And now we're going to go on to Grey, who's actually a villain right now for me, because I realised the actor's first name is David.
Yes.
And the character's name is Grey. I now have David Gray songs stuck in my head. Now, I'm not objecting to David Gray's song. I think his music is quite nice. Right now, though, it's distracting as fuck.
Which one do you have stuck in your head?
I don't know the title, but it's that one. Ooh yeah, hey, ooh yeah, ha, da 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 da. Whatever it is.
No fucking clue.
Yeah. I'm sorry, David. I butchered your song, but...
Oh, I know what one it is.
Yeah?
Yeah. Babylon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I did have to sing it in my head, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thankfully, I didn't sing that loud.
Right.
Grey.
Yes.
Slave trader prick.
Mm-hmm. Does he remind you of anyone?
He reminds me of lots of people. Should he be reminding me of someone in particular?
He reminds me of Septeria from the Romans.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
Not as physically threatening, but at the same time, because I said with Grey is the physical threat, like Pike. Whereas I would say Grey is more like the mental or the cunning threat, like Septeria was. Now Septeria was both combined, but because they're both dealing in slaves, they're very reminiscent of one another, I think.
Yeah, the thing with Grey is that everything must be legal, quote unquote, legal, of course, contracts and everything. Meaning, he's a lawyer. He's a he's such a stereotypical lawyer.
I know.
Of I know the law. I know the best way for me to make money, and no one can charge me with anything because I'm in charge of the prisoners. I didn't sell them into slavery. I gave them an option of signing a work contract, which they did. Never mind the fact that probably half of them can't read it.
He's like those scumbag attorneys that always get away scot-free in the episodes of Law and Order SVU. I hate it. Oh.
Exactly. That's exactly who Grey is, and that's why when you say like, oh, who does Grey remind you of? I'm like, who doesn't he remind me of? Even in fictional media, even in real life, we have lawyers like this.
We have just people we have like people from all walks of life like this.
Yeah. Also, question for you: did you get the sense that he never actually pays for anything?
Oh, big time.
He makes Perkins foot the bill for everything, and that's Perkins's own money.
And as a kind of a, I suppose, a side note to that, which do you think is sweeter? The fact that Grey essentially gets arrested for breaking the law. Lawyers. Or the fact that Perkins' treatment of him came back to bite him in the ass.
His treatment of Perkins, you mean?
His treatment of Perkins, yeah, that's what I
meant. Personally, I think it's the fact that he got arrested. It's the fact that like someone like Finch, who's as thick as a plank, was the one to bring him down, I find much more gratifying in my own heart. Because Perkins, he treats him horribly, but not to any sort of level that we haven't seen before with that type of character.
Yeah.
Do you know? I think what's probably the ultimate getting stuck in Grey's Craw isn't the fact that after everything he did to Perkins, he gets arrested. It's after everything he did to Perkins is fucking off to France.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I was
bye,
going to sing,
fucker.
I was going to sing La Marseillaise, but I don't actually know the words to it, and I don't want to insult anyone else that I have on this one. I can just imagine him singing "Flower of Scotland," though. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Which I have to say is the greatest rugby anthem of all time. Now, are we done with the character discussion, or is there anything else you want to discuss about Grey?
No. Slave trader prick, I think, was accurate summation.
So I pretty much said everything I want, but there's one thing that just popped into my head.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of details in relation to something that happened last week, and I think it happened this week as well. You used to mock me for when I kept saying the phrase "that's his maybe," and you said no one ever says that phrase. The Doctor has said it multiple times in these two stories. So ha.
Do you know this is not the first time I've had this thought in recent years?
Yeah.
Apparently, it's quite a common phrase. You were just the first person in real life I ever heard say it. Because the Doctor has said it several times. Also, I'm re-listening, really, to the Origin trilogy by A.G. Riddle. And it gets mentioned a lot as well. And every time they mention it, I'm like, people really use that phrase? Is it not be that as it may? That is maybe. It just sounds... And even though, yes, other people have said it, it still sounds fucking bonkers in my ears. I don't know why. But given the fact that I took the royal piss out of you last week...
Yes.
I will put my hand up and say, I am sorry that nearly 10 years ago, I made fun of you for using that phrase. Does my apology pass muster, Paddy?
Moving swiftly along. Thank you. Your apology is accepted. So... So, guys, as always, we're now going to give our overall scoring of the story. So, Trish, do you want to go first, or will I go first?
You go first. I've been going first for a lot of this.
Cool. So, I suppose, look, the long and the short of it is that I really enjoyed the story. And it's a bittersweet note because it's the last of the pure historicals. And I quite enjoyed the pure historical story, with one glaring exception.
Still available for sale if anyone wants it.
But it is kind of a bittersweet thing that for budgetary reasons that they had to stop making them. But I suppose plus the interest wasn't there as much as the pseudo-historicals, and just the wealth of futuristic and alien life that Doctor Who was bringing us. Ben and Polly have like great performances in this. As we said, shaky start, but looking back on it now, it's kind of an educational thing for them to kind of go, look, maybe we do have to reassess our perceptions of stuff as we go on. But the fact that they got to stretch their wings and solo adventures is fantastic. We talked about Jamie being an interesting member of the crew. I think it'll be cool. And I hope it's a case of like that he kind of bumbles and recovers as opposed to just bumbles his way the entire time, you know? And like, again, Troughton is doing a great job of really lending credence to William Hartnell's endorsement of him as the only person that could take on the role. So I would give this a 3.75 out of 5.
Not bad. Not bad. So for me, I have to be honest, right? We've spoken in the past about... I've been a fan of Doctor Who for over a decade. I've watched a fair few classic stories. I have some classic stories I've watched 10, 15 times. But there were some stories that I skipped. And Troughton was a Doctor that I skipped because so much of his stuff was missing. I just leapt over him entirely, except the War Games, and then I moved on in my life. But doing this podcast in this format and reviewing the missing stories the way we have brought up how much I was missing by skipping them. That, bearing all that in mind, right, which we've discussed all of that in the past, bearing all that in mind, given the fact that we took a bit of a break over the holidays, right, so we did the 3 ramblings, the 2 ourselves, the 1 with the guys. We'd also kind of recorded a little bit in advance.
Yeah.
And I watched this story yesterday. Also bearing in mind that Power of the Daleks is animated, 10th Planet is present/animated. It has been over 2 months since I've had to watch a story with the loose cannon recreations. It took me a while to get back into the swing of it. Again, this is nothing against the loose cannon guys. They're awesome.
Yeah.
However, you have to kind of be prepared to read and listen and watch the pictures all at the same time.
Oh.
Like, I'm someone who, I watch things with subtitles on. I don't know why. I just watch things with subtitles on. When you're watching a loose cannon production, you're not reading subtitles, you're reading description. You have to be actively paying attention. Took me a while to get back into that groove with this story, which I texted you about it yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Took me a little bit while to get back into it. That being said, once I got into that rhythm, I was really into it. I was really curious to see what was going to happen next. I really wanted to see how the Doctor and Polly were going to save Ben. I was really curious how the Jamie thing was going to work out, because again, I knew that he was going to be sticking around just from general knowledge. So I really enjoyed it. I think from a historical story perspective, and as the last pure historical story for many years, possibly ever, depending on your definition, I think it has everything you want from a historical story. It has drama, it has intrigue, it has action, it has comedy. Each of our main cast got a shining moment or two. You know, not necessarily including Jamie, although like I said, he did have his moments as well. I think it was a great story. 2 things bothered me. The first was the whole thing of Ben and Polly and their own knowledge of history. And not even their own knowledge of history, but like not being able to accept what's clearly being played out in front of them. You know, the fact that none of these people like you because you're English. Don't be praising the English coming over the hill. That's not helping. Do you know?
Yeah.
That I think could have been played better. It could have actually been a really nice moment of like, you know, like playing on, you know, the way Ben calls Polly Duchess and the whole class difference that there is between the two of them. It would have been a nice reversal if you had Ben teaching Polly something.
Yeah.
I think they missed a trick on that, personally. And the other thing is, and again, this is possibly because we only have the audio, the Doctor's accent drove me absolutely mental. I don't find accents like that funny. I find them annoying.
Hmm.
And more than a little bit racist. And for me, it's because it kept coming back, and every time I thought it was done, it came back again. So for me, I think, could you have done the story without him being the German doctor? I don't think so. I think the story works the way it is. But I think because I didn't get the facial features to go with it, I only ever got the same 3 pictures of him.
Mm.
It just started grating a little bit.
And as well, like, the fact that he picked, like, that particular character, because at that stage, George the Second or George the Third was the King of England, and they're from Hanover. So saying like, I'm from the country that your king is from, it's an incredibly smart move by the Doctor.
Yeah, so I don't think you could have done it without him doing that.
Oh,
I think I don't think it would have worked the same way.
Oh no, I'm agreeing. Like I'm saying, like, I don't think it would have.
But the accent didn't work for me. In terms of overall thoughts, though, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this TARDIS team is going to work together going forward. We have 2 modern companions, we have 1 companion from the past, and a Doctor who's very different from everything I've seen before. So for me, this should make some really interesting stories going forward. That being said, I gave this a 3.5.
And just one thing that I meant to say it in my notes about Jamie, just when you said about a performance by Jamie. If you think about it, he left the last members of his family and clan to help strangers, which is again an incredible trait to have in a companion going forward. Oh yeah, because he knew that, like, Jesus, their chances are better with me, and I'll be a fugitive, but at least I can do the right thing. Also, just I'd like to we got a very nice message from Earl Green, who does the Retrogram podcast, about the Adventure in Space and Time thing we did with the 2 lads, Dan and Paul, and he said he loved all his favourite podcasters being together. And Earl, if you're listening, I'm glad I gave you a good chuckle over who's trying to kill Sidney Newman. And Shane messaged earlier on, Shane is another long-term listener, and he said that last week was probably his favourite episode, but I think that might have to do with Trish taking the piss out of me.
Shane, I'm here to oblige.
So that's it for this week, guys.
I have one final note before we run away. Absolutely. Just because I have my running tally of our averages, and so far, season 4, riding high, we're averaging 4.13 for this season so far.
That's pretty good. Which,
bearing in mind that season 3 finished at
the War Machines. Yeah,
but finished at an average of 3.06 for the 2 of us, with mine being 2.94 for the season. So about that, your average, my average, and then our combined average is 4.13. I think season 4 is looking to be it's a great season so far.
And like, as we've kind of said, like, when we were doing our scorings of it, it's like we take the factors of the companions, the story, and other stuff into it. So like, while the story may be complete naff, the characters are quite interesting. Or, vice versa. Great story, shite characters.
Or it's the gunfighters.
Yes, or it's the gunfighters. Which, for me, again, is always saved by William Hartnell just having a fucking great time. As you may have noticed, I'm trying to swear a lot more so that Trish doesn't feel as conscious about it.
That's fine. They couldn't stop me when I was in school. You're not going to stop me now.
Cool. So yes, we have our new addition to the TARDIS team, and we're about to head on our next adventure. So Trish, tell us, what is our next adventure?
Yeah, so next week we're going to see how Jamie handles travelling through time and space.
Ooh.
As our team encounter the underwater menace. Ooh.
It better not be jellyfish. Fuck them.
I just remembered a thing.
Is this something that we can talk about on air, or is this something like,
it's just Castle Gregory when Dudley yelled at the 2 of us that there was jellyfish in the water, and we just belted it up the beach.
Oh, bastards. So until next week, guys. Bye.
Bye.